Before you even get to Washington, before you get to microphones and press secretaries and people pretending they don't read polls for a living, you have to start with the founders. Kool Herc would be George Washington, and that's not symbolism, that's structure. Herc didn't perfect hip hop, he created the conditions for it to exist at all. Before the Bronx parties, before breakbeats looping into something revolutionary, there was no nation to govern. Washington didn't invent democracy, but he defined what leadership looked like long enough for a country to argue with it. Herc didn't invent rhythm, but he defined hip hop as a culture capable of holding identity, politics, joy, and power. Neither could fully see what would come next, but everything that followed had to respond to their blueprint. Founders don't get debated, they get built on. Then comes Rakim, and this is where the revolution becomes permanent. Rakim would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, quietly transformational, not flashy, not loud, but absolutely structural. Rakim changed the internal logic of hip hop. Before him, rappers chased the beat. After him, they lived inside it. He slowed everything down, deepened the vocabulary, and introduced complexity without losing the people. That's FDR energy, policies rooted in care, stability, and systems that last longer than a headline. FDR didn't just respond to crisis, he rewired the relationship between government and everyday people. Rakim did the same thing for music. After him, the culture was smarter, heavier, and impossible to undo. You could build futures on it. Once that foundation is set, then you talk about modern power. You have to start with Jay-Z, because power always starts where money learns how to speak calmly. Jay-Z would be Barack Obama, and this time the comparison isn't aspirational, it's exact. Both are masters of navigating capitalism without pretending they can escape it. Both are proof of concept success stories the system loves to hold up and say, see, it works. And look, respect where it's due. Jay-Z went from the corner to the boardroom. Barack Obama went from community organizing to the Oval Office. That matters. That is history. But let's not dress it up as something it isn't. Neither one is here to burn the system down. Their politics live in access, opportunity, and proximity to power. Then the room changes temperature, because this is where my personal favorite walks in. Kendrick Lamar would be Elizabeth Warren, and if you know, you know. This is where policy stops being cute and starts being surgical. Kendrick governs in layers. His policies would come with footnotes you feel in your chest: corporate accountability, banking systems exposed like rigged games, environmental justice framed as unpaid moral debt. Kendrick doesn't shout, he dissects. Warren governs the exact same way. Neither trades in vibes, neither relies on charisma to cover shallow ideas. They scare powerful people because they actually understand how the machinery works. Once you understand the machine, you stop believing it's inevitable. That's the moment capitalism starts to sweat. And then comes Tupac, and the entire mood shifts. Tupac would be Huey P. Newton, and surveillance would begin before the first speech ends. Tupac, as a politician, would be brilliant, volatile, deeply compassionate, and impossible to contain. His policies would center protection, dignity, and self-determination. He would talk about policing the way people who've been policed talk about policing. Huey did the same thing. Both were intellectuals framed as threats because they refused to separate love for the people from anger at the system. Tupac wouldn't be allowed to age comfortably in office, but he would permanently change the language of power. History would eventually clean up what headlines tried to bury. Now, this is where the correction matters, because Nas is not Barack Obama. Nas is Jesse Jackson when Jesse Jackson ran for president. Visionary, moral, ahead of his time. Not elected, but deeply influential. Nas, as a politician, would implement the policies Jesse talked about when America wasn't ready to listen. Economic justice, housing as a right, education rooted in truth, coalition building without apology. Nas governs in long memory and unfinished business. Jesse Jackson didn't win the presidency, but his ideas reshaped the conversation. Nas operates the same way. His power isn't in holding office, it's in shifting what people think is possible. And when he governs, it's about making those ideas real, not watered down. Then confidence enters without asking permission. Megan Thee Stallion would be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The backlash would be immediate, loud, and deeply predictable. Megan's policies would center bodily autonomy, labor rights, and cultural respect. She understands exploitation because she survived it and outgrew it. AOC governs the same way. Both are smarter than their critics, more disciplined than their detractors, and endlessly scrutinized, for daring to be feminine and authoritative at the same time. America still panics when it sees that combination and calls it radical instead of honest. Precision matters here because this one doesn't yell, it cuts. Doechii would be Jasmine Crockett, sharp on purpose, elegant without being soft. Truth delivered with timing that lands like a closing argument. Doechii bends genres the way Crockett bends hearings. Both understand power well enough to play with it and still tell the truth. They don't raise their voice to be heard. They raise the standard. Their politics travel across lines without diluting blackness, and that unsettles people who depend on confusion. Then chaos smiles before it speaks. 50 Cent would be Donald Trump, but competent and self-aware, transactional, petty, strategic, loyal to a fault. He would govern through leverage, memory, and revenge economics. The difference is he would admit it. Trump pretends chaos is ideology. 50 treats it like a business model. He would be underestimated constantly, and that would be everyone else's mistake. Then sincerity tries to survive the group chat. Common would be Cory Booker, earnest, thoughtful, occasionally corny. Policies built on unity, healing, and shared humanity. Common believes people can grow. Booker believes government can help them get there. Both get mocked for optimism in a culture addicted to cynicism, but both show up prepared, consistent, and morally serious. They remind you that sarcasm isn't wisdom. It's just exhaustion dressed up as intelligence. By now, the realization settles in quietly. This isn't parody anymore. Rappers as politicians don't sound absurd. They sound fluent. They sound like people who've been paying attention longer than the people in office. They sound like America without euphemisms. And that's where the discomfort begins. The thing about this exercise is that once you see it, it stops being funny and starts being clarifying, because now the room is full, the spectrum is wide, and you can feel where American politics actually gets uncomfortable. This is the part where people stop nodding along and start crossing their arms, because we're no longer talking about symbolism. We're talking about governing instincts. We're talking about who knows how to move power, who understands systems, and who scares the people who benefit from things staying broken. Killer Mike walks in next, and nothing about the room is casual anymore. Killer Mike as a politician would still be Killer Mike, and that's not branding, that's the whole point. But if you need the translation, he leans Bernie Sanders with blackness turned all the way up and no interest in code switching it down. His policies would be relentlessly pro-worker, aggressively anti-corporate abuse, and rooted in the everyday math of survival. He talks about wages the way people talk about rent when the notice is already taped to the door. He talks about capitalism like someone who understands its benefits but refuses to excuse its cruelty. Bernie does that with white papers. Killer Mike does it with lived context and zero apology. Both of them scare people not because they're unrealistic, but because they're consistent. And consistency is dangerous in a system that relies on confusion and exhaustion. And then the energy changes direction entirely because André 3000 doesn't rush anything. André 3000 would be Zohran Mamdani, and the comparison sneaks up on you until it clicks all at once. Both move gently in systems addicted to noise. Both disarm people by refusing to perform aggression. André never chased the industry's idea of relevance, and Zohran doesn't chase American politics' idea of dominance. André would govern like someone who understands culture as infrastructure, as something that shapes how people move long before laws do. Zohran governs like someone who understands people as policy, not as talking points. Neither raises their voice, neither panders, and that quiet refusal to perform is exactly why people project fear onto them. They're not loud enough to dismiss and not sloppy enough to attack easily, which makes them deeply unsettling to power. Then Queen Latifah enters, and the entire conversation steadies itself. Queen Latifah would be Stacey Abrams, and it feels almost obvious once you say it out loud. Both women carry authority without shouting for it. Both understand power as something you build patiently, brick by brick, especially when doors keep getting slammed in your face. Latifah's policies would center representation, cultural dignity, and structural access. Abrams does the same thing with voting rights and democratic participation. Neither woman is interested in shortcuts, they're builders, and builders scare people who only know how to obstruct. Then the baseline drops, because Rick Ross would be James Clyburn, and suddenly the room feels more expensive. Corporate, strategic, deeply embedded in the machinery. Ross's politics would talk black uplift while never pretending the donor class doesn't exist. Clyburn governs that way. Both understand power as something you broker, not something you set on fire. Then the sound sharpens, because Chuck D doesn't do subtle. Chuck D would be Harold Washington with a rainbow coalition and no patience for nonsense. His policies would be rooted in multiracial working class solidarity, anti corruption, and truth telling that doesn't soften itself for comfort. Chuck D has always understood that volume is sometimes necessary when systems are designed to drown people out. Harold Washington governed the same way. Coalition wasn't charity to him, it was survival. Both men believed unity was strategic, not sentimental, and both would be completely intolerable to people who profit from division and silence. Then comes Eminem, and the tone gets uncomfortable in a very American way. Eminem would be Ruben Gallego, loud, sharp, sometimes obnoxious, always informed. Eminem, as a politician, would be deeply anti bullshit. He understands institutions better than people want to admit because he spent his career navigating spaces that didn't want him there. Gallego governs with that same edge, combat veteran energy, zero patience for performative outrage, policies that punch directly at hypocrisy. Eminem wouldn't be polite. Gallego isn't either. That's not a flaw. That's the feature. And then the mood lightens because politics doesn't always have to feel like a funeral. The Yin Yang twins would be Julian and Joaquin Castro, and it actually makes perfect sense. Twins, different tones, same mission, campaigns that feel fun without being unserious, policies that are accessible without being dumb. The Castros understand how to make governance feel human. The Yin Yang twins understand how simplicity can still move a crowd. Don't confuse lightness with lack of intention. That's a rookie mistake in both music and politics. Then Lil Dicky steps in, and this is where people laugh before realizing they've been read. Lil Dicky would be Gavin Newsom, self-aware, carefully constructed, fully aware of the camera at all times. Lil Dicky understands branding the way Newsom understands optics. Both are smarter than their caricatures and more calculated than their critics want to admit. They thrive in environments where irony is currency and image is policy. That's not accidental. That's modern governance, whether people are comfortable admitting it or not. By now, the pattern is undeniable. This isn't a gimmick, it's fluency. Rappers understand systems because they've had to navigate them without protection. They understand messaging because their survival depended on being heard. They understand power because they've seen what happens when you don't have it. And that's when the question flips completely. If rappers understand America this well, why do we keep pretending our politics should sound like people who don't? The answer isn't flattering, and that's where this really starts to matter. If this made you laugh, made you uncomfortable, or made something click, that's the point. Culture always tells the truth before policy catches up, and rappers have been explaining America long before politicians admitted there was a problem. If you want more conversations that cut through the noise, like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. This is Marcus Ferrell Live, where politics, culture, and power get talked about without the filters.